Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. As many of you know, I do like to have people on the channel, particularly former Jehovah's Witnesses, who can share their stories and help us learn more about the Jehovah's Witness experience and what it's like growing up or spending any amount of time in a Jehovah's Witness environment. Today, I have a special guest on the channel who's going to share her incredible story. Rebecca Harvey, thank you so much for joining me.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated to learn more about your experience. I understand there's a lot to unpack. Hopefully, if we take it point by point and go through it, I'm sure that there's a lot that the viewers will relate to in what you've been through. So how did you first get involved with Jehovah's Witnesses?
I was 5 years old when they came to our door when I was a child. We'd had holidays before that, and all of a sudden we weren't celebrating holidays. And, there's no Santa Claus and no more presents. And that, as a child, that's my first experience with the religion.
Okay. So, obviously when your parents are contacted at the age of 5, you're basically raised in it, aren't you? I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
So probably you don't remember birthdays or anything like that, or do you?
Oh, I do. Oh, I do.
All right,
I remember
okay.
coming downstairs with, mounds of presents on Christmas morning and birthdays and all of it. And then just all of a sudden it's gone. We don't do that anymore. Santa Claus isn't real. This is your new reality.
Sure. And so how would you describe your upbringing? Did Jehovah's Witnesses improve your childhood or diminish it?
That's a good question. I would say diminish it for sure. I think sports is for a lot of kids really important. So sports was out for us. Just participation in things, feeling like you're an outsider. I always felt like I was an outsider at school. I had friends in the religion that would be friends with me at, I call it church, but it's been 20 years for me. So meetings, they would be friends at meetings, and then at school, I'd be ostracized by the same people that I was friends with at the meeting. So it was a double-edged sword.
So people at the meeting who were fellow Jehovah's Witnesses were ostracizing you at school?
Correct, because I would tell everybody I was a witness at school, but they wouldn't. So they didn't want So they didn't want me in their groups of friends, kind of ruining what they were doing. So I always felt like even in the religion, I always felt like an outsider, if that makes sense.
That I can relate to that. That does make sense, because I can remember there being Jehovah's Witnesses at my school, and I think they gave me a wide berth for pretty much the same reason, because I took it seriously and was in a position to make their lives miserable by reporting on what they were doing. I was definitely ostracized. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you kind of feel that double. It's interesting because even inside the religion, I never felt like I was accepted because I was too much in the religion. Like, you're like a goody two shoes or something.
Well, so, when you take it seriously, what are you supposed to do? Looking back, I kind of envy those who didn't take it seriously and could lead a double life. But, when you genuinely believe that you'll die at Armageddon, if you don't take it seriously, of course you take it seriously, so.
Yeah. And then to have those same people be judging you later on, 20 years later, and still be in the religion, I'm just like, seriously.
So did this kind of taking it seriously spill over into your teenage years?
It did. I met my first husband on the ski slopes. I had a skiing accident, and it was Christmas Day, so all the witnesses were up. skiing, and he came down and helped me with his sister and a bunch of friends, and that's how I met him. And I didn't date. I was very isolated as far as dating goes. So the first guy that I meet that pays attention to me or whatever, that I was actually allowed to date, was the one I ended up with. So
was it a long courtship?
No. No, we ended up having premarital relations. Somebody got pregnant, and we ended up getting married.
Oh, okay. And did that have judicial ramifications for you?
It did. I was reproved. I was at 17 years old, got married at 17, had 4 kids over the next 35 months. So I had 4 kids before I was 21.
Wow. I can barely manage 2 before I'm 40. So that must have been a lot of hard work.
It was. He was 24 years old when we got married. I was 17.
You're kids yourselves, aren't you, at that age?
We really, yeah. I wouldn't want my 17-year-old getting married and having 4 babies before the age of 21. I can't even imagine that. So, yeah.
Okay. And it sounds like, with being reproved, I'm sure lots of people have in a similar situation have fared worse. Did you have a positive experience with Jehovah's Witnesses from that point onwards?
No. So the guy that I married, even though he'd been raised in the religion, he was never baptized. So he was not really going to meetings at all. He was, I don't know how you say it. He'd been away from the religion for a while. So we'd attend meetings off and on. But at that point in my life, I started kind of pulling away from the religion a little bit. Being stressed out as a new mom, and it was hard to make it to meetings anyway with the 4 kids because I always felt like I was doing it alone. And he didn't want to go because he had a lot of issues, drug and alcohol issues. He smoked. He was he would never have made a good witness. So to this day he still goes, but I don't think he's baptized. So I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I'm just wondering how, my question was how did your experience in the Jehovah's Witnesses improve from that point onwards? And it's sounding as though, it was fairly mixed at best.
I got some support with the kids, a little tiny bit. They'd throw baby showers and give you gifts, that kind of thing. But when it came to getting actual help, no. I was very isolated. He moved me out to an isolated location. There was a lot of abuse. And I really just kind of felt very alone because not having friends in high school, not having, when you stop going to meetings and stop attending, even gradually, that people pull away. And I really felt like the only reason that people would come over would be just to make sure I was being good, if that makes sense. So I never got help. I just got spied on. So people would stop in and say, oh, why aren't you doing what you need to be doing? And then leave and, carry on about their business. But you never really got real help.
Obviously, this is your story, and it's very important to me that you tell it the way you want and divulge as much or as little as you want. But you have said that there was abuse. So if I might ask, what form did that abuse take?
At first it was mental abuse. And then it became physical after a while. Our marriage ended. We had a lot of issues in our marriage. He had a lot of drug and alcohol issues. He'd leave for extended periods of time and not come home. He had abused a babysitter of ours when she was 12 years old. And then she committed suicide later.
So he was a child molester?
Yeah. Yeah, convicted.
Convicted? Convicted,
yes. So after the fact. So it's kind of hard because, so when we were married, I needed help with the babies. The twins were about 6 months old at the time. And her mom had asked if I needed some help. And for the first time in like a long time, I was like, wow, that's really nice. I'm actually getting some help with the babies. So she wants to come over and just kind of hang out and help me out and hold the babies. And she loved babies. So I was like, sure, maybe I'll have time to get a bath. So she comes over and we're watching TV for a little bit. And then I go upstairs and take the first bath I'd had in a long time. You know, up to that point, it's like quick shower, but I needed some me time. So I go upstairs to take a bath and I come out of the bathroom. And this is like the second time she'd been over, not the first time. So I come out of the bathroom and the house is pitch black, completely dark and very quiet. And I was like, this is really, it was eerie. So I come downstairs and I'm like, Amy? I'm like, David? Amy? And nobody, I just heard this sobbing in the corner and it was all pitch black down there. So I turn on a light and I go over there and she was sobbing and she just, but it was like the kind of sob, it was like that, like she was trying to like not sob. And it took me about an hour of telling her that whatever it was, that she could tell me, no judgments, that it was, you know, whatever it was, I'd call her mom and I'd help her talk to her mom about whatever it was. I didn't even fathom that it was what it really was. And so David had molested her and then gone upstairs to our bedroom and gone to sleep. So I call up her mom with her and I said, I have got some really disturbing news. Something happened with Amy and David. And I said, none of this is her fault. I just want her to know that right up front. And I just, you know, I wanted to call you guys directly because this shouldn't be just on Amy to tell you guys. And whatever needs to be done, I'm behind Amy and behind you guys. So the family called the elders, and I think I called the elders. The elders were called. I forget how it went. So the elders came over and talked to us separately. So they talked to their family and our family. And on both ends, we were told that this wasn't something that should go any further, that the police should not be contacted. And they looked at me and they said, there's no need for this to break up a perfectly good family. And that's exactly what you would be doing if you came forward to the police. So at that point, they said, you know, they just pretty much told me not to go to the police. So at that point, I didn't know any better. So I didn't. And I figured that part was up to Amy. At that age, I didn't really understand the full ramifications of what was going on. I mean, I didn't know anything about pedophiles. I didn't know anything about the fact that they usually will do it over and over again, repeatedly, the patterning. So I kept quiet, and the abuse continued at home. Never stopped. And we moved again to another house that was even more isolated. And this time there was witnesses next door that were friends with his mother. But I didn't see them much. She would just come outside and be nitpicky or whatever and go inside, and I rarely saw them. So the abuse continued, and then one day it got really bad.
We're talking now about the mental and physical abuse.
Correct. Yeah. So he stopped coming home quite a bit. He was on drugs and alcohol. He'd come in. One day he crawled in even with mud all over him because he'd been crawling in the ditches trying to get home from, he'd crashed his truck and he crawled through the ditch to get in the door. It was just mud head to toe. And my son I thought he had broken his nose. He was about 19 months old at the time. And so I had called him and he wasn't answering his phone. So I kept calling him and eventually he made it home. And so I took our son into the emergency room and came back home. And then at that point, I said, this isn't working. And we split up for a bit. And I really intended on just leaving him at that point. But then our daughter broke her arm a couple weeks later. And he said, hey, it's obvious you need me there. You're not fit to be a mother. These kids are too much for you. So he just moves back in. So the fighting continued at that point. And there was a point where we got in a huge fight because I was getting ready to leave and he didn't want me to. I had my keys in my hand. So at that point, he'd try to throw an iron at my head and it missed my head by about that much. And so I was going to go down the stairs and he threw me down the stairs and I landed on my knees and I had contusions that were like draining for 2 months. And then I was trying to get to the back door and he tried slamming my fingers in the back door, ripped the telephone cord out of the wall in the kitchen because I told him I was going to call the police. So he's trying to make it so I couldn't call the police. And I remember being in this coat because I was ready to go and the wood stove was going and he had me pinned on the floor in the living room. And at that point I was screaming, I want a divorce. I don't want to be with you anymore. I said a few curse words. And so he said, I'll call them myself and tell them you're having a mental breakdown. And at that point, I really thought I was dead. So he called the police. And while he was pummeling my stomach and 911 was on the phone saying, you need to get off her, sir, you need to get off her. And he's like, my wife is having a mental breakdown and I'm not leaving until you guys come and take her away. So they broke down the door because he wouldn't answer the door. And they cuffed him and took him straight to jail after interviewing both of us separately. So after that incident, I got a restraining order, moved out, took the kids with me, left everything there, just everything. And started over. And there was a period of time where things were okay. You know, I decided not to attend the meetings because I didn't want them following me home. Safety was my first priority for my kids and myself. And I really didn't want people knowing where I was. So there was a time when things were okay. And then I got a boyfriend. So after I got the boyfriend, I wrote David this letter because the sexual abuse still hadn't come out yet. So I wrote David this letter and I said, hey, I just, you don't really see the kids that much anyway. Because we had drop-off points where I'd go and drop them off in a parking lot. He'd pick them up. Visits he never even showed up for. So I said, you don't really see them often anyway. And what I'd like to do is I wanted to move to California. I wanted to move out of state. And I said, I met someone, I want to move down to California with the kids. And I'd like to, in lieu of you paying me child support, just take that money and have the kids fly back and forth. And so his mother, who was very, very attached to only one of our children, the oldest, kind of freaked out. And his sister had been working in the jail system. They're both witnesses. So at that point, I didn't know it, but they were starting to coach my oldest children to say about, to essentially say things that weren't true. So Judy, his sister, and his mother took my oldest into a police station to see one of her friends, and she was coached into saying that I molested my own kid, my oldest. So at that point, CPS came at 8:00 at night and took all 4 of my children into custody, and it was the worst day of my life. So I was like, "What is going on?" Then they said, "Well, you'll find out later. The detectives will be in touch with you," and it was terrible. I had a breakdown. It was pretty bad. So the detectives sat in front of me and they said, "Well, we know you did it." And I was like, "Dude, what is it you think I did?" I'm like, "These are my children. So what am I guilty of, And they said, "Well," and it got pretty graphic. They said that your oldest child said that mommy puts her finger in your deep hole or something like that. It was pretty graphic. It was pretty bad. And I said, the only thing I'm guilty of is being a good mom. And my husband he was my husband at that, actually he was my ex-husband by then, wasn't he? No, he wasn't. We were in the middle of a divorce, I guess, still. So at that point I told him about the Amy thing, and I said, if you want to interview anybody about anything, maybe you should go interview Amy's family. And they said, well, at this point, we will, but your kids are gone for at least 6 months until we straighten all this out, because we don't know who the perpetrator is here. So I said, well, give me a lie detector now. And they're like, well, you can lie. Anybody can lie and pass a lie detector test. And I want to have a lie detector test too. I said, I want this straightened out as soon as possible. So they gave me a lie detector test, and of course I passed with flying colors, but he didn't. So, and it came up that there was more than just child abuse that he was guilty of. He'd also had experience with animals. People that have been abused not oftentimes, but sometimes do become abusers themselves. And so, I mean, that's the issue I have with the religion and people just not burying it all. And it just, through multitudes of generations of families, I've seen abuse get just worse and worse in the religion because they just keep burying it. So there's a very large family of 12 where the dad, David, was best friends with some of the kids, and the dad was a pedophile, a well-known pedophile in the religion. He'd abused not just his grandkids. Some of them had committed suicide. It got really bad in that congregation.
Well, so there's so much to unpack there.
There's a lot to unpack. Yeah.
I guess what really kind of strikes me is, and I guess I have to remember as well that you were married incredibly young. Yes. What really strikes me is that, there were multiple red flags that you seemingly went past. Are you able to kind of reflect or explain what your thinking was in staying with a man who was mentally and physically abusing you and who you knew had sexually abused the babysitter? So, right. What was your reasoning? What was your reasoning or logic for sticking it out? Growing up, we were always taught to go to the elders for help. And every time I went to the elders, they'd just make me feel like it was my fault what was going on. Like I just need to be a better mother, a better wife, and that maybe I wasn't just pulling my end of it. And so I'd go back, and I should have gone to a counselor or,
something like that. Later, when I did go to a counselor, I finally realized that the advice they were giving me was horrible. Even went as far as when I was in the middle of getting my divorce because of the abuse, the elders showed up in court on his side. And how is that supposed to make you feel? Like, here I am, the one getting abused, and the one where my kids are getting abused, and he's a known pedophile now. Now they know.
Sorry, your children were abused?
Not my own children that I know of. One of my children may have, but that hasn't. She's got some issues that she hasn't wanted to address.
Right.
But I don't know for sure.
Right.
So, yeah.
But the elders sided with your husband and made you feel as though it was your fault. The thing that confuses me as well is that of the two, trying to look at this from the perspective of elders, which is a very warped perspective, I think we can recognize. They would go into this, or they should go into this with, if there is any bias, with a bias towards you, because you're the baptized one, he's not baptized. So I guess what's confusing me is how he was given so much leeway and so much preferential treatment, even though he wasn't a baptized Jehovah's Witness.
There's different cliques in the religion. His mom was pretty tight in the religion. She was a pioneer. So I really felt like it was because of his mom's pull, maybe her friends that had elders. That's the only explanation I can come up with. I've asked myself the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And your ex-husband was convicted. Was he convicted for the abuse of Amy?
Yes.
Right.
She wrote. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She wrote a letter. I was looking for my divorce papers the other day because I used to have a copy of it. I'm going to have to go to the courthouse and get it again. I think it's sealed unless I'm probably the only one that can get it. So.
And how did David's congregation respond to him? And I include his elders. How did his elders respond to him being convicted for child abuse?
They just, from what I heard, they just let him keep attending. They let him continue to be around children in the congregation. Absolutely no ramifications at all for his behavior.
Is he still around children, to your knowledge?
Yes, and he continues to attend meetings. Yep.
That's very disturbing. Wow. So I guess one part of the story, which is also intriguing me, is how did you manage to extricate yourself? Because obviously a lot of this abuse, certainly in terms of the mental and physical abuse, was perpetuated by your indoctrination, essentially, and your belief that the elders had some profound wisdom when it came to sticking with an abusive spouse. So, how did you break free from that control?
I'd like to say it was all of a sudden, but having family in the religion and being so isolated as a teenager and having the only friends that you have, the very few friends that you have left, being in the religion, it was a bit more of a gradual process because I really had no support system. I mean, David made sure that the support system I had was gone by the end of my marriage. So I began making what, quote unquote, worldly friends after the divorce. I finally made the break after a while and just let my parents know I wasn't coming back. Because in our divorce, not only did the elders show up, but his mother had about 7 or 8 friends, some of whom I'd never even met, make statements about me in court, saying that I was a bad mom, that the extent of it was unreal what they did. So they lied. And then because I did have a boyfriend and I was truthful, I was disfellowshipped. So at that point, some of my family stopped talking to me. And I mean, I just kind of drifted away at that point. The religion was not supportive at all. I felt like it was one of the reasons why my kids were taken from me. And I was a good mom. I didn't do anything wrong. And the perpetrators, they wouldn't go after the real perpetrator, which was my ex-husband. So I felt very betrayed. And why would you want to go back to something like that?
Do you think there might have been an element of you simply maturing? Because again, when you're married into that situation at such a young age, you're still a kid, aren't you? And you're fairly naive, I would suggest, at the age of 17 and in your early 20s. And so, a lot of this could have simply been, the inevitable process of maturing. I'm also wondering, to what extent the rules on domestic violence impacted or influenced your response. So you'll know that, domestic violence isn't grounds for divorce and you are expected to stick it out. Did the fact that there was no real way of transitioning gracefully to another marriage with a Jehovah's Witness when you're in an abusive relationship, did that play any part, do you think, in the course of action that you took?
It did, because I could have, thinking back, it's been so long since I've been a witness. I forget some of the rules sometimes. I could have left him and been free had I just kicked him out after the whole incident with Amy, because that would have been considered, something that was grounds for being free. I could have done that, and I didn't. They asked me if I really wanted to break up my family over something so trivial.
They used the word trivial, did they? Yeah,
they did. And that wasn't the first time he'd done it either. It was the second time, come to find out.
So, oh, really?
Yeah, that was the second time. So he had done it actually twice with her in particular.
Okay.
And she did commit suicide later because she did not get, her mother was a witness. And 10 years later, she didn't get the help she needed and she ended up committing suicide. She got hooked on drugs. She was a straight A student. When I met her, she's absolutely a gorgeous little girl, beautiful inside and out. And at the age of 22, got hooked on some drugs and spiraled pretty steadily downward and committed suicide. It's a really sad story.
Did she commit suicide before or after the conviction?
It was about 10 years after. It took about 10 years for her to spiral down.
Also, well, if she sorry, I do apologize. I'm trying to kind of preempt questions from the viewers.
Oh, it's okay.
So if she committed suicide 10 years after the conviction when she was 22, that would have meant that the conviction happened when she was 12 when it happened. And when you were telling the story, it gave the impression that quite some time passed from the abuse to when the conviction occurred.
So when the event happened, the elders wanted to cover it up. So there was a cover up until my divorce, which was about 18 months later. Then there was a conviction when she was about 14 years old. So at that point, there was that. So
it was more like 8 years to the.
Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
I'm interested to know, because obviously, it's a real tragedy when anyone commits suicide, but particularly in these circumstances where you have a young person who has been through such an ordeal as that, they've been abused and their abuse has been covered up. I guess I wanted to know whether she at least saw some justice, and it seems like she did, but it obviously wasn't justice that came about due to the way the organization manages abuse. It was justice due to the fact that you essentially reported her abuse and led to it coming to the attention of the elders. Yeah.
Yes, and he pled down to a lower conviction. he could have actually gotten a lot more in terms of, I mean, he went to jail. He was in and out of jail for 5 years because he kept coming out and reoffending. So he could have gotten a lot. But she didn't want to go on the stand. She just wanted to write her statement. And then my sister wrote her statement too, because my sister was also abused by my ex-husband. She was also molested by my ex-husband. That was when I was dating, and didn't come out until after the incident with Amy. My sister actually had repressed memories that came out later and nightmares. So,
Is David on the sex offenders register?
Yes. Yes.
In that case, do you mind if I ask what his full name is?
Sure. It's David Richard Humphrey.
I think it's important that ordinarily I try to avoid going into details with names, but especially when we have a situation, according to what you've told me, where this individual, he's done prison for 5 years, and now he is attending meetings. And, you know, it could be, we don't know, it could be that the branch has given some direction for family members to be informed. But if I were a betting man, I would bet that that's not the case. And if the only means of, you know, highlighting this individual's abuse and, you know, potentially bringing this to the attention of individuals in that congregation is for us to talk about it on this video and basically expose this man, I'm willing to do that, you know. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah. He I don't understand how you can stand behind a pedophile and not stand behind a little girl.
Indeed. And wow. And the abuse has had such tragic results. It's resulted in a suicide. And, you know, Amy, you know, nothing that is done now can bring Amy back. And goodness knows how tormented she was by what happened. So in terms of you and your family and your children, where are things now? Do you feel as though you're healing? Do you feel as though the situation, at least in terms of you and your family and your circle, do you feel as though that's improving now?
I was able to raise my kids outside the religion because it did take me so long to break away. It was a number of years before my kids got Christmas or birthdays. I had a birthday party for my middle child when she was 14 years old, and I lived a good hour and a half away from my parents, and my mom came into my daughter's birthday party and kind of broke this in a pretty violent manner. She was pretty angry because I'd been hiding the fact that I'd been celebrating the holidays. At that point, I pretty much said, screw it. We're celebrating the holidays. If you don't like it, this is...
So hang on a minute. So you're a grown adult and you're throwing a birthday party for your 14-year-old daughter, and your Jehovah's Witness mum turns up at the house and does what?
She broke up the birthday party. She says, kids, it's time to leave.
It's time to leave your own birthday party. Put the presents back in the wrapping.
Yes. And she shamed my children. She's like, is that a birthday cake? What do you think Jehovah would, you know, and this is years after I left. I was just like, pretty much, I wasn't pretending to be a witness. I was just, you know, kind of leaving out the fact that we celebrated the holidays. I didn't want to throw it in their face, you know, so.
It's just such controlling behavior though, because, you know, once your child is grown up, it's their choice to do what they want, and you have no place whatsoever to tell them that what they can or can't celebrate. So it's just very strange behavior, really.
Yes. So she shows up out of the blue and just starts screaming at the kids. It was pretty bad. So at that point forward, I was gung ho. I'm like, I didn't care from that point forward. I was just like, nope, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm raising my kids. If you don't like it, I don't care. From that point on, I think that was my tipping point.
And
So,
did there come a point as well, because it sounds as though a lot of your escape from this organization involved, a natural aversion to an organization that had been so responsible for mistreating you and putting you in harm's way. At what point did it also become like an intellectual exercise? Because of course it's one thing to say, I'm out of this has failed me completely. I've seen too much badness and abuse in this organization. And it's another thing to understand that there are intellectual reasons and that it's a false religion. At what point were you able to kind of learn the truth about the truth, as people often call it?
I enjoy watching your channel. I think I really felt brainwashed, very alone and brainwashed. I felt like things were repeated. I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I felt like things were repeated as a kid over and over and over and over, but I didn't really know what they meant, if that makes any sense at all. Like, we never read the context around the scriptures. We just pick up 5 scriptures and say they all related to each other. And I think my brother's the only one I know that really read the context around the scriptures. I really felt like it wasn't my choice to begin with. We were made to go to meetings. We were made to get baptized. I mean, when I say made to, it's like, do you want it to be hell at home, or do you want do you want to be able to survive until you can leave the house?
Well,
and every kid wants to make their parents proud too. So
exactly. Amen to that. I think, lots of viewers will relate. I think what I find fascinating about your story is it's one of those stories where it's so remarkable, you would almost it almost seems too remarkable to be true. But unfortunately, this is exactly the sort of thing that happens when this perfect storm of factors comes together. The policy on domestic violence, the policy on child abuse, the way women are viewed, and all of these things can create these unthinkable situations. And for you to come through all of this, remotely comprehensible and coherent, and with your wits intact, is a huge testament to your strength. So well done.
Thank you. I feel blessed to have been able to get counseling, and I attended I don't know if you know what PTSD is, but I've got some PTSD issues from all this. So I was able to attend a week-long retreat down in California and get some EMDR. I don't know if you know what that is. So I got some EMDR around that, and that did help a lot. I did that very recently, in fact. So I've worked really hard to kind of grow past this, but it's been a long process. I mean, my twins are now 28. My oldest is now 31. I've got 6 grandkids, 6 beautiful grandkids. And I'm just thankful that my grandkids weren't the same thing it was. I'm trying to break that cycle of abuse.
Am I right in saying as well, because I was reading the notes, the producer notes, and am I right in saying that you're also involved in the local community? I
am. So I belong. My fiance passed away, who was a police officer, in late 2016. He was shot.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, he was shot and beaten to death. In fact, that brings up another thing. My parents didn't want to attend the funeral. It was very, very public. They didn't want to attend the funeral. They said it was too patriotic of an event for them to go to.
Is this because your fiance was a police officer?
Correct.
And he was attacked and killed in the line of duty?
Yes.
So your Jehovah's Witness parents refused to come to the funeral because they thought there would be flags and there would be the national anthem and that kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, it was very, very public. There was thousands that attended. It was held at the Tacoma Dome out in Tacoma. So they didn't come to his funeral. So I didn't talk to them after that for about 5 years. It was pretty traumatizing. So anyway, so because of his death, there is a support group that helped me out a lot. It's called Concerns of Police Survivors, and it helps rebuild the lives of shattered families from police-related deaths. So I volunteer for them. I sit on the board of WA State Cops. It's a national organization in the U.S., but I'm just on the board for Washington State.
Perhaps it would be okay to put a link in the description for anyone that wants to check out that organization and
I'd appreciate
support it. Okay.
Thank you.
Wow. That's my pleasure. No, thank you for sharing your incredible story. Again, so many layers to it, but it all makes sense in the context of, an organization with such terrible policies. So I guess the last question is, if there's anyone watching, perhaps a young woman who is on the fence about whether to stay in the religion, what would be your advice?
Get out. Get out. Find your power and get out. Find your people. Find other people to support you in your journey. There are other people that will support you in your journey. You're not alone, and you can do it. You are strong enough. Don't let people bully you into thinking you can't, because you can.
Wonderful words and an inspiring story. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lloyd.
So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I've certainly found it fascinating. Don't forget that you can watch more such videos by subscribing to the Lloyd Evans channel, but that's all we have time for. Take care.